Hey, how's it going, everybody? Let's have a look at Leetcode question number 20. One question which I was actually recently asked during one of my interviews. So the question goes as follows. Given a string s containing just the characters that you can see over here, so you have the pair of rounded brackets, a pair of curly brackets, and a pair of square brackets, determine if the input string is valid. And we have an example over here of an input string, and this one is valid because the brackets are given in such an order that they all cancel out. To get a bit of a better idea of what combinations are valid and what ones are invalid, let's have a look at the right-hand side, where we can have a look at some of the possible combinations that we have. And so let's look at the very first one. The very first one over here is exactly the same as the input we have on the left-hand side in the editor. So over here you can see that we have the first two brackets, which are rounded, and these first two brackets, they make up one pair and they cancel each other out. Then when we move further along in the string, you can see over here we have another pair of rounded brackets that also cancel out. And after all of that is done, we see that the final pair that remains also cancels out because they are a pair of square brackets. So we can already say that this very first string is valid. How about the next strings? Now the next strings are invalid, but let's have a look at number 2 and let's see why this one is invalid. Over here you can see that we have a pair of rounded brackets, and within these rounded brackets we only have one open square bracket. So this one leads us to have a bit of a problem, and that is why this sequence over here is in fact invalid. Now moving on, in the third string you can see we only have open brackets, and that is why this one is also invalid, because we don't have any corresponding closing brackets. And for the final example, this fourth one, you can see we only have closing brackets and no open brackets. So similarly, this one is also invalid. Now, the next question that we need to answer is, how can we go about creating an algorithm that determines whether the input string is valid or invalid? So over here, I've started off a small outline of how we can think about an algorithm. So over here we have the string s, and this input string which we have over here is the one which we also have as an example on the left-hand side in our editor. So how are we going to go through this one in order to create an algorithm effectively? So let me just get the right color of, let me take perhaps blue. So we're going to start off with the very first bracket, and we see it's an open bracket. Now, if it is an open bracket, what we're going to do is we're going to take this open bracket and we're going to put it into the open bracket array. All right. Then when we get to the, Then when we get to the next bracket over here, this is the second bracket, we see it's a closed bracket. And whenever we have a closed bracket, what we're going to do is we're not going to add it to the open bracket array. We're not going to do this. Instead, we're going to check if the closed bracket has a corresponding open bracket in the open bracket array. Now in this case, you can see, yes, this second bracket which we have does indeed have this corresponding open bracket in the open brackets array, which is exactly the reason why we're going to take this one and pop it from our array of open brackets. And then this array is going to be empty after it's popped. Then we move on further in our sequence. We have another open bracket, and whenever we have open brackets, we already said we're moving the open brackets to the open bracket array, and this one is a square one. And once we've done that, we move to the next bracket, and we have another open bracket, which we can add to the open bracket array, but this one is a rounded one. And we then move on to the fifth bracket, and we see, all right, this one has a corresponding open bracket in the open bracket array, so we're going to pop this one from the array. So this one's going to be gone. And then when we get to the final bracket, the sixth one, we're going to again check the open brackets array, and we're going to see, hey, the last one we have in this array is this open squared bracket. So we can then say, hey, the sixth bracket we have over here does in fact have a corresponding open bracket. We can pop it as well. And then we have gone through the entire string. And if the open bracket array is the length of it, in fact, if the length of the open bracket array is equal to 0, then we know that we have a valid combination, and we can output the value true. If, on the other hand, the length of the output bracket array was not 0, so if this did not apply, then we know, all right, we have an invalid sequence. All right, so let's now move to the left-hand side and actually write down the algorithm. So we're going to define an algorithm, and this algorithm takes a string s as an argument, and it's going to return a Boolean value. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our open bracket array, and that is exactly the one that we talked about over here on the right-hand side, this one. So after we've done that, we also need to make another array. We're going to call this closed to open, closed to open. And this set of values is going to store all the open brackets that correspond to the closed brackets. Now, I'm going to copy paste this because I'm a bit too lazy to type it out right now. But you can see over here that we have this one closed bracket, the rounded closed bracket, and we say that the corresponding open bracket is the rounded open bracket. Similarly, with the closed square bracket, we have the open square bracket as the corresponding one, and the same applies to the curly bracket. You'll see where we use this in just a moment. Now we're going to do a for loop, and we're going to take each bracket in the string, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check if we have an open bracket. So if the bracket we're currently considering is in the open brackets list, so I'm just going to copy paste again. So if the bracket we currently consider is an open bracket, then of course we want to append it to our open brackets array. So we're going to append the bracket. All right, that's great. But what happens if we don't have an open bracket, but instead have a closed bracket? Then we're going to cover this in this else if. So we're going to write else if, and then length open bracket is not equal to 0. And then I'm going to add another line, and just to make it a little bit quicker, I'm going to copy paste this. Bear with me, I need to make one change over here. All right, so what I've added is this small block of code over here. What are we doing over here? So first we're checking if the length of the open bracket array is not equal to 0. If the length of the open bracket array is not equal to 0, that means we still have candidates over here in our open bracket array. So we have open brackets that need corresponding closed ones. And if that is the case, we're going to check if the last open bracket which we added to the open bracket array has a corresponding open bracket, and that is also the one we're currently looking at. So if the bracket, we're taking a bracket, so let's say, for example, we are over here, we're looking at this closed bracket, and this closed bracket has a corresponding open bracket, which is the open rounded bracket. And if this open rounded bracket is equal to the last bracket which has been added to the open bracket array, then we can pop these open brackets from our list. Now, moving on, the last thing we need to do is we need to see that if the length of the open bracket array is equal to 0, and we are not currently looking at an open bracket, then we want to return false. Does that make sense? I hope it does. So return false. And finally, we are going to check if, so we're going to write return and length open bracket is equal to 0. So what we've done at the very end is we're checking if the open bracket array really has no more open brackets left, because that is the only case in which we can say that we actually have a valid string. So let's go ahead and execute this algorithm by writing print, and then we're going to pass in this very long invalid string of brackets. And let's go ahead and then run this. And you can see that the console returns true, because the input string, which I've added over here, is in fact a valid one. You can see that this open square bracket is closed subsequently, and the rounded brackets have closed brackets, and the curly brackets also have closed brackets. So let's perhaps also try this with a invalid combination. So let's make this invalid something like this is invalid. Now it should return false, and it does. So as you can see, our algorithm works, and that is the solution to this algorithm question. Yeah, let me know if you would like to see some more algorithm interview questions, and I'll make some more videos on this.